When was school no longer your safe space? The classroom door slammed open, and a German Shepherd lunged into the room with two cops with hands on their weapons. "We have probable cause that someone in this room caused 20 overdoses to the local high school students," the bigger cop said, his badge reading Sergeant Scrim. "The dealer is here, and our dog's never wrong." 20 overdoses? That happened last week at the rival school. 3 kids had died. It was all over the news. Fentanyl-laced pills that looked like Adderall. But why were the cops here? You can't just... Mrs. Griffin tried to argue, standing from her desk. "Ma'am, sit down or I'll arrest you for obstruction," Sergeant Scrim barked. She sat, face pale. The dog started working the room systematically. Its name tag said, K9 Thor. Every step deliberate, nose hovering inches from backpacks. Kids pressed back in their chairs as it passed, some lifting their feet like the floor was lava. Amy Johnson started crying silently. Darren Whitmore, who everyone knew sold grass behind the gym, was literally shaking, sweat dripping onto his test paper. The dog paused at his desk, sniffed twice, then moved on. Thor worked his way down my row. Judy, nothing. Harland, nothing. Then me. The dog stopped, circled my desk, sat down firmly, staring at me with those intense brown eyes. "That's the signal," the handler said, hand moving to his radio. "That's our guy. Positive alert." "What?" I stood up, my calculator clattering to the floor. The whole class was staring. "There's some mistake. Hands behind your back." Sergeant Scrim was on me in 2 strides. "I don't even drink," I protested as the cold metal cuffs clicked tight. "I've never touched drugs. Test me right now. I'll pee in a cup." "Save it for booking," the younger cop said. The bigger cop grabbed my backpack, dumped it onto Mrs. Griffin's desk. Books, calculator, protein bars, SAT prep guides, everything crashed down. My laptop hit the corner of the desk and the screen spiderwebbed, then went black. 4 years of saved money for that laptop. "Nothing here," Scrim muttered, sounding disappointed. He pawed through my things again, checking every pocket. "Check his locker," the younger cop suggested. "Dealers always have a stash spot." They marched me down the hall like a convicted criminal. Every classroom we passed, faces pressed against door windows. I saw my ex, Lauren, looking horrified, my basketball teammates confused. My locker combination fumbled in my shaking hands. 17-35-9. I'd had the same combination since freshman year, but suddenly couldn't make my fingers work. Scrim got impatient and shoved me aside, making me tell him the numbers. They tore through it like animals. Old tests fluttered to the floor. My lucky basketball shorts from when we made states. A moldy sandwich I'd forgotten about that made the younger cop gag. Nothing else. "Where is it?" Scrim grabbed my shirt, pulling me close. His breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes. "Where's your stash?" "I don't know what you're talking about. I study, I play basketball, I go home." "Nobody's that clean," the younger cop said. Thor was sniffing me again, going absolutely ballistic. Barking, jumping, the handler had to use both hands to hold him back. Whatever he had contact with it recently. "This is the strongest alert I've seen from Thor in 2 years. You're going to tell us where it is," Scrim said, shoving me against the lockers. "Those 3 kids who died? Their parents are planning funerals instead of high school graduations. You did that." "I don't even know anyone at the other high school," my voice cracked. "Car," Scrim said suddenly. "Where do you park?" "Blue section, but..." They dragged me through the main entrance. The whole school was watching from windows now. I could see phones pressed against glass, everyone recording my perp walk. This would be on everyone's IG within minutes. In the parking lot, they made me point out my car, the used Mitsubishi my parents got me for my birthday. Navy blue, dent in the bumper from when I was learning parallel parking. But Thor walked right past it like it didn't exist. Instead, the dog lost its mind at a white BMW 3 spaces over. It practically climbed the door, barking and scratching like there were stakes inside. Thor was trained not to damage property, but he was fighting against that training. "Open it," Scrim demanded, pulling me toward the BMW. "I can't." "Don't play games. Open the car. I literally can't." "Kid, you're looking at 20 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Life in prison. The death penalty is on the table in this state for fentanyl deaths. Open this car." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my keychain out. I pressed the unlock button on my car fob. My Mitsubishi beeped and flashed its lights. The BMW didn't move. "Wrong button?" Scrim grabbed my keys, started pressing every button. Lock, unlock, panic, trunk. My Mitsubishi went crazy, honking, flashing, chirping. The BMW sat silent and still. "Why won't your key work?" He screamed, frustration boiling over. His face was turning red, veins popping on his forehead. Thor was literally trying to eat through the BMW's door now. Whatever was in that car was more than just Darig's. Thing was, this BMW was my girlfriend's car. I could go free if I just told the cops so right now. I didn't want to snitch on her. But then Scrim turned to me. I'm done with you, and took out his handcuffs. The metal clicked around my wrists again, tighter this time, and Scrim grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. He pushed me toward the patrol car parked at the end of the lot, not caring when I stumbled over the curb. Thor kept going crazy at the BMW, his barks echoing across the parking lot while students watched from every window. The handler finally had to drag the dog away by his collar, all four paws scraping against the pavement as he fought to get back to that white car. Scrim opened the back door of the patrol car and shoved my head down, forcing me into the cage area behind the seats. The space smelled like old fast food and something sour I didn't want to think about. My destroyed laptop kept flashing through my mind. 4 years of saved birthday money and summer job paychecks, now just broken glass and dead circuits on Mrs. Griffin's desk. The younger cop got in the passenger seat and grabbed the radio, his voice all official and proud as he called it in. He said they were bringing in the dealer from the high school, said the dog gave the strongest alert in 2 years, said they were transporting now for processing and formal questioning. I tried to say the BMW wasn't mine, but Scrim just turned up the radio, drowning out my voice with some talk show host arguing about politics. My wrists hurt bad from how tight the cuffs were, the metal digging into my skin every time the car hit a bump. We drove past the pizza place where I worked weekends, past the gym where I played pickup games, past the library where I studied for the SATs. Everything looked normal and wrong at the same time, like the whole world kept going while mine fell apart. Scrim drove fast, taking corners hard enough to slam me against the door. The younger cop kept glancing back at me like I was some dangerous criminal, instead of a kid who'd never even gotten detention. I realized they'd already decided I was guilty, that nothing I said would matter, because Thor sat down at my desk, and that was all the proof they needed. The police station looked like every cop show I'd ever seen, all white walls and bright lights and people in uniforms walking around with folders. They pulled me out of the car and marched me through a side entrance, past rooms with closed doors and bulletin boards covered in wanted posters. A lady at the front desk looked up when we came in, barely interested, like she saw kids in handcuffs every single day. They took me to a room with a camera mounted in the corner and told me to stand against the wall with the height measurements. Flash, turn left, flash, turn right, flash. My eyes hurt from the lights and I probably looked guilty in every photo even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Next came the fingerprints, my fingers pressed into ink and then rolled onto cards, one at a time. The cop doing it had done this so many times she didn't even look at my face, just grabbed each finger and rolled it like I was an object instead of a person. They took my phone, my wallet, my keys, my watch, everything from my pockets and put it all in a clear plastic bag with a number written on it in black marker. The bag sat on the counter and I stared at it, thinking about how 2 hours ago I was taking a math test and now I was processed like an actual criminal. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and cold, no shadows anywhere, just bright white light showing every scratch on the walls and stain on the floor. My whole life just got turned upside down because a dog sat down next to my desk. They walked me down another hallway to a small room with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs that looked like they came from a school cafeteria. One cop took off my handcuffs and told me to sit, then left and closed the door behind him. I heard it lock with a click that made my stomach drop. The table had scratches all over it, probably from other people who sat here before me, and I wondered if any of them were innocent too. A clock on the wall ticked loud enough to hear, each second feeling like forever. I tried to figure out what to say about the BMW, how to explain it wasn't mine without throwing Viviana under the bus. If I told them it was her car, they'd go after her instead, and even though I was scared, I didn't want to be the kind of person who sold out his girlfriend to save himself. But if I didn't say anything, they'd think I was hiding something, which I guess I was. The chair was uncomfortable, metal and hard, and I couldn't find a position that didn't make my back hurt. I watched the clock tick from 2:47 to 3:15, then 3:30, then 4 o'clock. My mom would be getting off work soon and she'd probably try to call me, and when I didn't answer, she'd start to worry. The room was cold enough that I could see my breath, or maybe I was just shaking from nerves. The door opened and a different cop came in, older than Scrim, wearing a suit instead of a uniform. His badge said Detective Malone, and he carried a thick folder that he set on the table between us. He sat down across from me and opened the folder, taking his time, making me wait and watch. Then he started reading me my rights from a card he pulled out of his pocket, each word slow and clear like he was talking to a little kid. He asked if I understood I had the right to remain silent, and I nodded. He asked if I understood anything I said could be used against me in court, and I nodded again. He asked if I understood I had the right to a lawyer, and I nodded a third time, even though my brain was going too fast to really process what any of it meant. The words felt important but also distant, like they were happening to someone else and I was just watching. Malone put the card back in his pocket and looked at me with an expression that seemed less mean than Scrim's, more like he was disappointed in me instead of angry. He opened the folder and pulled out 3 photos, sliding them across the metal table toward me. School pictures, the kind with the blue background where everyone looks awkward and young. 3 kids smiling at the camera, probably taken at the beginning of the school year when they were still alive and planning their futures. Malone pointed at the first photo and said her name was Sarah Millard, 17, wanted to study engineering at State. He pointed at the second and said his name was Ethan Williams, 18, already accepted to college on a football scholarship. The third was Lauren Rodriguez, 16, planning to be a doctor like her mom. Malone said their parents were planning funerals this week instead of graduation parties. He said Sarah's mom found her daughter blue in her bedroom. He said Ethan's dad did CPR for 20 minutes before the ambulance came, but it was already too late. He said Lauren died in the hospital with tubes in her throat while her whole family watched. The photos sat there on the table between us, and I couldn't look away from their faces. I told him I was sorry those kids died, my voice coming out shaky and wrong. I said I had nothing to do with it, that I'd never even met them, that I didn't know anyone at the other school. Malone leaned back in his chair and asked why Thor alerted on me twice if I was innocent. He said drug dogs don't just make mistakes, especially not Thor, who had years of training and hundreds of successful cases. I said I didn't know. Maybe the dog got confused or smelled something else. Even as I said it, I knew how weak it sounded, how much it made me look like I was lying. Malone kept staring at me with those disappointed eyes, like he wanted to believe me but couldn't. He asked if I'd been around anyone who used drugs recently, if maybe I touched something without knowing it. I said no. I studied and played basketball and went home, that was my whole life. He wrote something in a notebook, his pen scratching loud in the quiet room. Malone pulled out more photos from the folder, these ones showing the white BMW from different angles. Close-ups of the door, the trunk, the license plate. He slid them across the table and asked whose car it was. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I looked at the photos and thought about Viviana begging me not to tell, about her scared face in the parking lot. I hesitated too long and Malone noticed, his eyes getting sharper. He leaned forward and said, "Protecting someone who kills kids makes me just as guilty as the dealer." He said 3 families were burying their children because someone sold them poison, and if I knew who it was and didn't say anything, I was helping a murderer. The photos sat there between us, and I could feel my face getting hot. Could feel the guilt written all over me, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Malone kept staring, waiting for me to break. I asked for a lawyer, the words coming out shakier than I wanted. Malone's whole face changed, going from disappointed to hard and cold. He stood up fast enough that his chair scraped loud against the floor. He said that was my right, but it made me look guilty, that innocent people usually want to help solve crimes instead of hiding behind lawyers. He said if I really cared about those dead kids, I'd tell him everything I knew right now. He picked up his folder and walked to the door, then turned back and said I should think real hard about what kind of person I wanted to be, someone who helps catch killers or someone who protects them. Then he left and locked the door again. 2 different cops came and took me down more hallways to a holding cell at the end of a long row. The cell smelled like bleach mixed with body odor and something else I couldn't identify. A metal bench ran along one wall and a toilet sat in the corner with no seat or privacy. The walls were covered in scratches and words carved into the paint, names and dates and curse words. One of the cops uncuffed me and told me to sit, then slammed the door shut with a clang that echoed down the hallway. I sat on the metal bench and it was cold even through my jeans. I put my head in my hands and tried to think. How did protecting Viviana turn into me facing murder charges? How did going to math class this morning lead to sitting in a cell that smelled like piss and chemicals? Thor's alert kept playing in my mind, the way he circled my desk and sat down so sure, so confident. The 3 dead kids' faces from their school photos. Malone's disappointed stare, Scrim's red, angry face. The whole school watching through windows as they dragged me out in handcuffs. My destroyed laptop. My mom who didn't even know yet that her son was sitting in jail. The clock on the wall outside the cell said 5:30, and I wondered how long they could keep me here, if anyone was coming, if this was just the beginning of everything falling apart. A guard appeared at my cell door around 7:30 and said I could make my one phone call. My legs felt shaky walking down the hallway to where a phone hung on the wall, and I had to dial Mom's number 3 times because my fingers kept hitting wrong buttons. When she answered, her voice sounded tired from her shift at the hospital, and I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. She said hello again, sounding worried now, and I finally managed to tell her I was at the county police station and I'd been arrested. She asked what happened and if I was okay, her voice getting higher and faster, and I said I was fine, but they thought I was dealing drugs, and could she please come get me? She said she was leaving right now and to not say anything to anyone until she got there. The guard took me back to the cell, and I sat on the metal bench counting the scratches in the paint on the wall, trying not to think about how Mom sounded scared in a way I'd never heard before. 40 minutes felt like 4 hours, but finally the same guard came back and took me down different hallways to a visiting area with glass partitions and phones on the walls. Mom was already sitting on the other side when I got there, still in her nurse scrubs with her purse clutched tight in her lap. I picked up the phone and she immediately started talking, saying she was so glad I was okay and asking if they hurt me. I told her no, they just put me in a cell, and she closed her eyes for a second like she was praying or trying not to cry. Then her face changed and got harder, more determined, and she told me not to say anything else to anyone, not one word, until we got a lawyer. I nodded, and she asked if I understood how serious this was, and I said yes, even though I wasn't sure I really did. A desk sergeant came over and tapped on the glass, gesturing for Mom to come talk to him at the front desk. I watched through the partition as they talked, seeing her face go from worried to confused to pale. She came back to the phone and told me they were holding me pending charges, but hadn't formally charged me yet because the investigation was still going. I asked what that meant, and she said it meant I had to stay here unless they decided to let me go. She asked the sergeant something I couldn't hear through the glass, then turned back to me looking sick. She said if they did charge me, bail would probably be $50,000, which we definitely didn't have. I felt my stomach drop because $50,000 might as well be $1 million for us. The sergeant let Mom stay in the lobby to make phone calls, and I got taken back to my cell to wait. I could hear her voice carrying down the hallway even though I couldn't make out exact words, just the tone of her talking to different people. At one point her voice got louder, and I heard her saying her son was a good kid, straight A's, basketball scholarship offers, never been in trouble once in his whole life. Hearing her defend me like that made my throat get tight. I put my head back against the cold wall and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them over and over. Around 6 o'clock, the guard came back and said I was released to my mom's custody. He explained it was pending further investigation, which meant I had to stay available and couldn't leave the county. Mom had to sign a bunch of paperwork at the front desk, promising I would appear if they called me back, and I watched her hand shake as she wrote her signature. They gave me back my phone and wallet from the plastic bag, and Mom put her arm around my shoulders as we walked out to the parking lot. The drive home was mostly quiet except for Mom asking basic questions about what happened. I told her about the classroom raid, Thor circling my desk and sitting down, getting handcuffed in front of everyone, them dumping my backpack, and breaking my laptop, checking my locker, the perp walk through school, and the white BMW in the parking lot that Thor went crazy over. She asked whose BMW it was, and I said I didn't know, which was technically true since I didn't say whose it was out loud. She glanced at me like she knew I wasn't telling everything but didn't push it. When we got home, she made me sit at the kitchen table while she heated up leftover chicken and rice in the microwave. I just stared at the plate when she put it in front of me, not hungry at all. She sat down across from me and said we were getting a lawyer first thing in the morning, and until then, I wasn't to talk to anyone. She meant not friends, not Viviana, not anyone from the school, just keep my mouth shut completely. I nodded and pushed rice around my plate with a fork. She asked if I understood, and I said yes. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, then told me to go get some sleep. I went to my room and lay on my bed still in my clothes, staring at my phone. It was blowing up with texts and notifications, everyone from the school messaging me or posting about what happened. I opened Instagram and saw at least 10 different videos of my perp walk, me in handcuffs being marched through the school with Scrim's hand on my arm. The comments were brutal. Half the people were asking what happened and if I was okay, but the other half had already decided I was guilty. Someone posted a poll asking if I was really a drug dealer and 60% voted yes. Another post showed a screenshot from someone saying they always knew I was sketchy, which was complete garbage since we'd literally never talked. I saw my basketball teammates commenting on different posts, some defending me and some staying quiet. I turned my phone face down on my nightstand, but I could still hear it buzzing with new notifications every few seconds. I couldn't sleep, just lay there replaying everything from the moment Thor sat down at my desk, to Scrim's red, angry face, to the sound of my laptop screen cracking. The next morning, Mom called in sick to work, which she never did. I heard her on the phone in the kitchen making calls about lawyers, her stress obvious in every conversation. We couldn't afford a private attorney, she kept saying, so did we qualify for a public defender, and how did that work exactly? She was on hold for a long time with different offices, and I heard her explaining the situation over and over. Finally, around 10 in the morning, she came to my room and said we'd been assigned a public defender named Meredith Bowden, who agreed to meet us at her office downtown that afternoon. We drove there in silence, Mom gripping the steering wheel tight. Bowden's office was in an old building with a tiny waiting room that had torn magazines on a coffee table. When Bowden came out to get us, she turned out to be younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back and these sharp, tired eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. She shook Mom's hand and then mine, her grip firm and quick, and told us to follow her back to her office. Her office was small and cramped with file boxes stacked against one wall and a desk covered in papers. The chair she pointed me to had a rip in the vinyl seat, and I could see yellow foam poking through. Mom sat in the matching chair next to me, and Bowden settled behind her desk, pulling out a yellow legal pad and clicking a pen. She asked me to start from the beginning and tell her everything that happened, so I did. I explained about being in class when Thor and the cops burst in, how the dog circled my desk and sat down, the handcuffs and the destroyed laptop and my locker getting torn apart. I told her about the parking lot and Thor going crazy at the white BMW 3 spaces from my car, how Scrim kept demanding I open it even though my keys didn't work. Bowden wrote constantly while I talked, her pen moving fast across the yellow paper, and she never interrupted once even when I paused to remember details. When I finished explaining about getting released without charges but told to stay available, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. She said the most important rule from this point forward was that I say absolutely nothing to the police without her present, and she meant nothing at all, even if they acted friendly, or said they just wanted to clear up a few quick questions. Mom nodded and squeezed my hand. Bowden explained that the canine alert gave them probable cause to arrest me and search my stuff, which was why everything that happened was technically legal, even though it felt wrong. She said Thor sitting at my desk was enough to justify their actions in court. However, she continued, probable cause wasn't the same as proof of guilt, and without finding actual drugs on me or in my car or locker, their case against me was weak. The problem was if they managed to search that white BMW and found drugs inside, and if they could somehow connect me to that vehicle, then I could be looking at serious charges including distribution and possibly even those deaths at the other school. I felt my chest get tight when she said that. I asked what would happen if they did search the BMW and found something inside it. Bowden leaned back in her chair and said it would depend entirely on whose car it was and what evidence they had linking me to it. If the car belonged to someone I knew, and they could prove I had access to it or had been seen near it, that would be bad for my case. She looked at me carefully, her eyes sharp, and asked if there was anything I wasn't telling her about that BMW or why Thor might have alerted on me. My stomach twisted and I could feel Mom watching me from the side. I shook my head and said no. I didn't know anything about it, which was technically true since I didn't know what was actually in Viviana's car. Bowden held my gaze for a few more seconds like she was trying to read my mind, then nodded and made another note on her pad. She told us she would file paperwork requesting any evidence the police had, and we would go from there, and Mom thanked her multiple times as we left. The drive home was quiet and tense. Mom kept both hands on the wheel and didn't turn on the radio like she usually did. When we got home, she made me sit at the kitchen table even though it was almost dinner time and I wasn't hungry. She reheated some leftover chicken and rice and put a plate in front of me, then sat across from me with her own plate that she didn't touch. She told me again not to talk to anyone about the case, not my friends, not anyone from the school, definitely not anyone connected to that BMW situation. I nodded and pushed rice around my plate with a fork. She asked if I understood and I said yes. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, then told me to go get some sleep. I went to my room and lay on my bed still in my clothes, staring at my phone. It was blowing up with texts and notifications, everyone from the school messaging me or posting about what happened. That evening my phone buzzed with a text from Viviana, asking me to meet her at our usual spot in the grocery store parking lot. I stared at the message for a long time, knowing Mom had just told me not to talk to anyone, but I needed to understand what was going on and why Thor had gone crazy at her car. I waited until Mom fell asleep on the couch watching TV, the blue light from the screen flickering across her face. Then I grabbed my keys and snuck out the front door as quietly as possible. The grocery store was about 10 minutes away and mostly empty this late on a weeknight. I pulled into the far corner of the parking lot where we usually met and saw Viviana's white BMW already there under a broken light. She was leaning against the driver's door, and when I got out of my car, I could see she looked scared in a way I had never seen before. Her eyes were red like she had been crying, and she kept glancing around the parking lot like someone might be watching. She asked immediately if I had told the cops the car was hers, and I said no. I didn't tell them anything. Relief washed over her face and she stepped forward and hugged me tight. She said she was so sorry I got caught up in this mess and that someone must have borrowed her car without her really knowing about it. I asked who would do that and she pulled back, wiping her eyes. She said maybe her older brother or one of his friends since they sometimes asked to borrow it, but she would figure it out and make everything right. I walked over to her BMW and looked at it more carefully. The door panel near the driver's seat looked slightly off, like someone had pried it open and hadn't put it back perfectly. The plastic edge didn't sit flush with the rest of the door, and I could see a small gap. When I pointed it out to Viviana, she came over and examined it, then said she hadn't noticed that before, and maybe it happened in a parking lot somewhere when she wasn't paying attention. Her explanation sounded weak, and I could tell she was nervous. She grabbed my hands and begged me not to tell the cops that the BMW was hers, because her whole family would get in trouble, and it wouldn't help me anyway since I hadn't done anything wrong. I wanted to believe her story about someone borrowing the car, but something felt incomplete, like she was leaving out important details. We stood there in the dark parking lot for a few more minutes, while she kept asking me to promise I wouldn't say anything, and finally I said I needed to go home. I drove back feeling more confused than before I came, my mind racing with questions about what was really in that door panel and why Viviana seemed so scared. The next morning I got up early and drove to the school trying to act like everything was normal. I made it to the main entrance and was walking toward my first period class when the office secretary intercepted me in the hallway. She said Principal Butler needed to see me immediately and walked me to the administrative office. Butler was waiting in her office with the door already open, and she gestured for me to sit down in the chair across from her desk. She told me that due to the ongoing police investigation and the serious nature of the allegations against me, the school was placing me on emergency suspension until the matter was resolved. I sat forward in my chair and argued that I hadn't been charged with anything, and I was completely innocent. Butler folded her hands on her desk and said she understood my position, but the school had to prioritize student safety above everything else. She pulled out a letter that was already typed and printed, sliding it across the desk to me. The letter outlined the suspension terms and said I could appeal to the school board once the police investigation concluded, and charges were either filed or definitively dropped. I took the letter with shaking hands and asked how long this would last. Butler said she couldn't give me a specific timeline since it depended on how quickly the police completed their investigation. She stood up, indicating the meeting was over, and told me I needed to leave campus immediately and that I would be marked as trespassing if I returned before the suspension was lifted. I grabbed the letter and walked out of Butler's office without saying anything else. The hallway felt like it stretched for miles as I headed toward the main entrance, my footsteps echoing off the lockers. Through classroom door windows, I could see students turning to stare, some pointing, others pulling out their phones. A group of sophomores I didn't even know pressed their faces against the glass in room 204, and one of them definitely took a picture. By the time I reached the main doors, my face was burning and my hands were shaking so badly the suspension letter crinkled in my grip. The morning sun hit me as I pushed outside, and I realized everyone would know by lunch that I'd been kicked out. My phone was already buzzing in my pocket with notifications, probably screenshots of me walking through the halls being shared on every social media platform. I made it to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a solid 10 minutes before I could even put the key in the ignition. When I finally drove out of the parking lot, I saw more phones pointed at me from the senior courtyard. This would be all over Instagram within an hour, everyone posting about the drug dealer getting what he deserved. I drove home and sat on the couch staring at nothing until my phone rang around 2 p.m. Coach Beck's name showed on the screen and my stomach dropped before I even answered. She asked how I was doing and I said fine, even though we both knew that was a lie. Then she got quiet for a few seconds before telling me she had to take me off the basketball team while the investigation was ongoing. Her voice sounded genuinely sad, but she explained that the school couldn't have someone under investigation for drug dealing representing them in games. We had our playoff game next week, the one scouts were supposed to attend, and I'd been counting on that game to show what I could do. I asked if this was permanent or just temporary, and she said it depended on how things turned out with the police. The silence stretched between us until I finally asked about my scholarship opportunities, the question I'd been too scared to voice. Coach Beck went completely quiet, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. She finally said the college scouts probably wouldn't look favorably on my situation right now, her words careful like she was trying not to destroy me completely. She suggested I focus on clearing my name first and worry about basketball later, but I could hear what she wasn't saying. My senior season was done. The scholarship offers I'd been working towards since freshman year were probably gone. 4 years of early morning practices, of choosing gym time over parties, of studying plays until midnight, all of it wiped out in one morning because a dog sat down next to my desk. I thanked her for calling and hung up before she could hear my voice crack. Mom came home early from work around 4 p.m. and found me sitting in the living room with all the lights off. She didn't ask why I was in the dark, just sat down next to me on the couch and put her hand on my shoulder. She told me Bowden had called with an update, and my whole body tensed up waiting for more bad news. The police were preparing to search the white BMW, and they wanted to question me again about my connection to it. Mom said Bowden advised that I continue saying absolutely nothing to the police without her present, and she'd filed some kind of paperwork requesting any evidence they had linking me to the vehicle. Then Mom turned to look at me directly and asked if I knew whose BMW it was. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out at first. The hesitation was too long. Way too long, and I could see Mom notice it. I finally said I wasn't sure, which was technically true since I didn't want to admit I knew it was Viviana's car. Mom studied my face for another few seconds before nodding slowly, but I could tell she didn't believe me. She stood up and said we'd talk more after she made dinner, then walked to the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Viviana's scared face in the parking lot, begging me not to tell the cops about her car. Around midnight, I grabbed my phone and started searching for information about K9 alerts. I found article after article about drug dogs being wrong, about cases getting overturned because the dogs alerted on innocent people. One study said the dogs were only accurate like 50% of the time in some situations. Another article talked about handlers unconsciously cueing their dogs to alert on people they suspected, even when no drugs were present. I read about a case in Illinois where a dog alerted on a guy's car, and they tore it apart looking for drugs but found nothing. The guy sued and won because it turned out the handler had trained the dog to alert on command. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading everything I could find, taking screenshots of the most important articles. Maybe this was the answer. Maybe Thor had been wrong about me, or maybe his handler had somehow made him alert because they were so sure someone in that classroom was guilty. The next morning, I drove to the library as soon as it opened at 9 a.m. I used one of their computers to print out the articles I'd found about K9 reliability issues, the pages coming out of the printer in a thick stack. The librarian gave me a weird look when I paid for 47 pages of printouts, but didn't say anything. I drove straight to Bowden's office downtown and walked in without an appointment. The receptionist started to tell me I needed to schedule something, but Bowden came out of her office and waved me back. I spread the articles across her desk and explained what I'd found about false alerts and handler bias. She picked up the first article and started reading, her eyes moving quickly across the pages. After going through about 5 of them, she looked up and said this could be helpful for building reasonable doubt if the case went to trial. But then she set the papers down and told me we still needed to address why Thor alerted specifically on me twice, once in the classroom and once in the hallway. The dog had gone absolutely crazy both times, stronger than any alert the handler had seen in 2 years, according to what they told the police. I didn't have an answer for that, and neither did Bowden. 2 days later, I decided to try going back to the school to get my assignments from teachers. I knew I was suspended, but I figured if I went during lunch when most people were in the cafeteria, I could slip in and talk to Ms. Griffin quickly. I parked in the visitor lot and walked toward the main entrance, trying to look casual. The security guard saw me coming and stepped directly into my path before I even reached the door. He told me suspended students weren't allowed on campus, and I needed to leave immediately. I tried to explain I just wanted to get my homework, but he cut me off and said if I didn't leave right now, he'd call the police. The way he said it made it clear he wasn't bluffing. I turned around and walked back to my car, my face burning with embarrassment again. From the parking lot, I could see students in the windows watching the whole thing, probably taking more pictures to post online. I sat in my car for a few minutes trying to decide what to do when I saw Miss Griffin walking across the parking lot toward me. She was carrying my textbooks in a thick folder, and when she reached my window, she handed them through. She told me she'd put together all my assignments for the next 2 weeks and included study guides for the upcoming tests. Her voice was sympathetic, but she kept glancing back at the school building like she was worried someone would see her helping me. She said she hoped everything worked out, but she couldn't be seen helping me too much given the circumstances. I thanked her, and she walked back toward the building quickly, her arms crossed like she was cold even though it was warm outside. I drove home with the textbooks on my passenger seat, feeling more isolated than ever. That evening, I was lying on my bed scrolling through my phone when a DM notification popped up from Lauren. We hadn't talked since the breakup 3 months ago, so seeing her name made my heart jump. I opened the message and she said she'd seen something weird the night before the raid. She was at the school late for yearbook committee and saw Viviana arguing with some older guy near the white BMW in the parking lot around 10 p.m. Lauren said they were moving boxes from his truck to Viviana's car, and Viviana looked really upset about something. The guy was tall with a beard and drove a black pickup truck. Lauren took a picture because the whole thing seemed sketchy, but she didn't think anything of it until the raid happened. She sent me the photo, and I could clearly see Viviana standing next to her BMW, while a guy I didn't recognize carried a box toward the trunk. My hands started shaking as I stared at the image. This was proof that someone else had access to Viviana's car. This was proof that whatever was in that BMW, someone else put it there. But it was also proof that Viviana knew about it, that she'd been there when it happened. I screenshot Lauren's message and the photo, my mind racing with what to do next. I stared at that screenshot for hours that night, my thumb hovering over the delete button a dozen times. Part of me wanted to pretend I never saw it, to protect Viviana like she asked, but the other part kept seeing Scrim's face in the parking lot, hearing him say those 3 kids were planning funerals. Around 2 a.m., I finally made a decision and sent Bowden a text asking if I could meet her first thing in the morning. She responded within minutes saying to come to her office at 8. I barely slept, just kept looking at the photo of Viviana standing next to her BMW while that guy carried boxes toward the trunk. The next morning, I drove to Bowden's office in the county building downtown, my phone feeling heavy in my pocket. Her office was tiny, just a desk buried under file folders and a couple of metal chairs that looked like they came from a school cafeteria. She gestured for me to sit, and I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I opened the screenshot. Bowden leaned forward, studying the image carefully. She asked who sent it, and I told her my ex, Lauren, who was at the school late for yearbook committee. Bowden zoomed in on the photo, focusing on the boxes, the truck, the guy's face. She said this was significant evidence that someone else had access to the vehicle Thor alerted on, and she could probably get the parking lot security footage from that night to verify Lauren's account. Then she looked at me with those sharp eyes and asked again whose car it was. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. She waited, not pushing, just watching me struggle with the decision. I finally admitted the BMW belonged to my girlfriend Viviana, but I swore I never drove it, never had keys to it, never put anything in it. Bowden's expression changed, her jaw tightening as she leaned back in her chair. She said this information changed everything, that now the prosecution could argue I had access to the vehicle and helped store the drugs. I protested that I never touched her car, that I didn't even know this guy in the photo, but Bowden cut me off. She told me I needed to decide what was more important, protecting Viviana or protecting myself. The police would trace the BMW's registration soon if they hadn't already, and when they did, my silence would look like I was hiding something instead of just being innocent. She said obstruction of justice was a real charge they could add, and it would make everything worse. I felt sick sitting there, realizing how badly I'd messed up by not telling them about the BMW from the start. Bowden said she'd request the security footage and submit my formal statement that I never had access to the vehicle, but she made it clear I was taking a huge risk by waiting this long to tell the truth. I drove home feeling worse than before, knowing I'd probably just made everything harder for myself by trying to protect Viviana. That evening, I was doing homework at the kitchen table when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered and heard Malone's voice, which made my stomach drop because Bowden specifically said the police weren't supposed to contact me directly. He said they'd traced the BMW registration to Viviana's family and wanted to know why I hadn't mentioned my girlfriend's car was the one Thor alerted on. My mouth went dry and I managed to say I wanted my lawyer present before hanging up. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. It rang again immediately, Malone's number flashing on the screen. I answered without thinking, and he said 3 kids were dead. Their parents were burying them this week, and I was protecting the dealer who killed them. He said that made me complicit in their murders, that I was just as guilty as whoever sold those pills. I hung up again and turned my phone off, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The next morning, I called Bowden as soon as her office opened and told her about Malone's calls. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said a word I'd never heard her use before. She told me she was filing a formal complaint about Malone contacting me without my attorney present, and she'd make sure the judge knew about this violation. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. The police now had enough for a search warrant on the BMW, and once they executed it, everything would come out. She said I needed to prepare myself for what they might find, and what that would mean for my case. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, barely able to focus on anything. That night, I knew I shouldn't go to Viviana's house, but I had to talk to her, had to understand what was really going on. I drove there around 9 p.m. and parked down the street, my stomach in knots. When I knocked on her door, she answered with red, swollen eyes, her face streaked with tears. She pulled me inside quickly and said the police had come that afternoon with a warrant and searched her BMW. They'd found a hidden compartment in the door panel with pills and cash inside, and they'd taken the whole car as evidence. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Viviana grabbed my hands and swore she didn't know the compartment was there, that someone must have installed it without telling her. She said her older brother's friend Ethan had borrowed the car a few times over the past month, and he must have been using it to store drugs. I asked if she could prove Ethan installed it, and she shook her head, crying harder. She said Ethan was already known to the police for dealing, and he'd probably deny everything. I asked her the question that had been burning in my mind since the parking lot. Why didn't she tell me any of this before? Why did she let me get arrested, let me sit in a cell, let me get suspended from the school, when she knew her car had something to do with it? Viviana broke down completely, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. She said she was scared and didn't want to lose me, that she thought if she just stayed quiet, it would all blow over. She begged me not to tell the police I knew about the car ahead of time because it would make both of us look guilty, like we were working together. I stood there looking at her crying on the floor and realized she was more worried about herself than about what happened to me, about my destroyed laptop and my lost scholarship chances and my basketball season. She kept saying she loved me and asking me to trust her, but all I could think about was Malone's voice saying those 3 kids were dead and I was protecting the person responsible. I left without saying anything else, just walked out her front door and got in my car. My hands shook on the steering wheel the whole drive home. When I got back, Mom was asleep on the couch with the TV still on, and I went straight to my room and pulled out my phone. I texted Viviana that I couldn't lie for her anymore, that I could go to prison for something I didn't do. She called me immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted back saying if I really loved her, I would trust her and stand by her. I stared at that message for a long time. She wasn't asking if I was okay or worried about what would happen to me. She was worried about herself, about what I might tell the cops. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but couldn't stop thinking about those 3 dead kids and their parents planning funerals. Bowden called at 7:30 the next morning, which woke me up. Her voice sounded urgent, and she said we needed an emergency meeting at her office as soon as possible. The police had executed their search warrant on the BMW and found significant evidence. I got dressed fast and Mom drove me downtown, both of us silent in the car. Bowden's office was small and cluttered with case files stacked everywhere. She sat us down and opened a folder with police photos of the BMW's interior. They'd found a hidden compartment built into the driver's side door panel, professionally installed with a release mechanism. Inside were pills that looked like Adderall but tested positive for fentanyl, plus almost $3,000 in cash wrapped in rubber bands. She asked me to tell her everything about my relationship with Viviana and that car, no more holding back. I finally explained the whole situation, how the BMW was Viviana's, how I'd noticed the door panel looking weird, how Lauren had witnessed someone loading boxes into it. Bowden listened without interrupting, taking notes on her yellow legal pad. She said we needed to be proactive instead of reactive. We had to provide a formal statement establishing that I never drove the BMW, never had keys to it, didn't know about any hidden compartments. This wouldn't guarantee they wouldn't charge me, but staying silent while they built a case connecting me to that vehicle would be worse. She pulled out a recording device and said we were going to document everything right now, create a timeline of my relationship with Viviana and every interaction I'd had with her car. I asked if this meant I was throwing Viviana under the bus, and Bowden looked at me seriously. She said I was telling the truth, and if Viviana was innocent, she had nothing to worry about. But protecting someone who might be involved in drug dealing that killed 3 kids wasn't loyalty. It was stupidity. We spent the next 2 hours drafting a detailed statement. Bowden asked me questions and recorded my answers, stopping frequently to make me clarify details or add information. When did I start dating Viviana? October, about 5 months ago. Had I ever driven her BMW? No, never. Did she ever let me borrow it? No, she drove it herself when we went places together. Did I have keys to it? No, just my own car keys. When did I first notice the door panel? The night I went to her house after getting released. Did I ask her about it? Yes, and she said she hadn't noticed it before. Had I ever seen anyone else with the car? Just that one time Lauren mentioned, but I hadn't witnessed it myself. Bowden recorded everything, including the parking lot security footage request she'd submitted and the K9 reliability research we'd gathered. She said she'd submit all of it to the DA's office today, along with a formal request for them to investigate other suspects connected to the BMW. That afternoon, Bowden called and said the school parking lot security footage had come through. She sent me screenshots on my phone and I opened them with my heart racing. The footage from the day of the raid showed my navy Mitsubishi parked in its usual spot in the blue section. 3 spaces away was Viviana's white BMW. The timestamp showed I'd arrived at 7:42 a.m. and parked, then walked straight into the school building. The BMW was already there when I arrived. More footage showed me leaving my car at 3:15 p.m. after basketball practice and driving away. I never went near the BMW, never even walked past it. Bowden said this was good because it established clear separation between my vehicle and the one Thor alerted on. The more important footage came from 2 weeks earlier, the night Lauren had mentioned seeing something weird. The timestamp read 10:17 p.m. and showed an older guy, maybe late 20s, backing a pickup truck next to the BMW. He opened the truck bed and started moving cardboard boxes to the BMW's trunk. Viviana stood nearby looking uncomfortable, her arms crossed, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She wasn't helping move the boxes, but she was definitely there watching it happen. The guy made 4 trips back and forth, loading boxes, then drove away in the pickup. Viviana got in the BMW and left 2 minutes later. Bowden said this supported the theory that someone else was using her car for drug storage, and Viviana might have known about it but wasn't the actual dealer. The question was who the guy was, and whether Viviana would identify him. The police brought Viviana in for questioning the next day. Bowden had sources at the department who kept her updated, and she called me that evening with details. Viviana had admitted the BMW was hers, but claimed her older brother's friend borrowed it a lot over the past 2 months. She'd given them his name without much hesitation, some guy named Ethan who was already known to police for prior drug offenses, mostly possession and small-time dealing. Viviana told them Ethan said he needed to borrow her car because his truck was in the shop, and she'd let him because her brother vouched for him. She claimed she didn't know Ethan was using it to transport drugs, and had no idea about the hidden compartment. The police were skeptical, but they couldn't prove she was lying. They'd released her, but told her not to leave town while they investigated further. 2 days later, Malone called Bowden's office and asked me to come in for another interview. This time his tone was completely different over the phone, less accusatory and more investigative. Bowden and I met him at the station in a different interview room than before, one with windows instead of the windowless box they'd put me in originally. Malone had photos spread across the table and a laptop open with what looked like surveillance footage. He asked me detailed questions about my interactions with Viviana's car. Had I ever been inside it as a passenger? Yes, probably a dozen times when we went to movies or restaurants. Had I ever touched the door panels or noticed anything unusual? Not until that night after I got released. Had I ever met anyone named Ethan? No, I'd never heard that name before. Malone showed me a photo from someone's social media, a guy with a shaved head and tattoos on his neck. I recognized him immediately as someone I'd seen Viviana talking to once in a parking lot outside a convenience store, but I'd never spoken to him directly or been introduced. Bowden presented all our evidence in a folder she'd prepared. The parking lot footage showing clear separation between my Mitsubishi and the BMW on the day of the raid. The security video of Ethan loading boxes while Viviana watched. The K9 reliability research showing Thor's alert history and false positive rates. My consistent statements of innocence from the beginning. She argued there was no actual evidence connecting me to the drugs beyond Thor's alert, which could have been a false positive or cross-contamination from being near Viviana, who'd been near Ethan, who'd been handling drugs. Malone listened and took notes, his expression neutral. He said they were investigating Ethan now and had surveillance on him. If Ethan was the dealer, they'd know soon enough. He told me I was still a person of interest, but they were exploring other leads. Bowden asked if that meant they weren't planning to charge me, and Malone said he couldn't make promises, but the evidence was pointing away from me and toward Ethan. We left the station and I felt like I could breathe a little easier for the first time since Thor had sat down at my desk, but Bowden warned me not to relax yet because investigations could change direction fast. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was sitting in my room trying to catch up on homework I'd missed during the suspension. Bowden's number showed on the screen and my stomach dropped. She told me Malone wanted to talk and asked if I could come to her office in an hour. I drove there with Mom, both of us quiet, and when we arrived, Bowden had her laptop open with notes spread across her desk. She explained that Malone had called with major news about the investigation. The police had arrested Ethan after following him for 3 days and catching him making a deal in a parking lot downtown. During questioning, Ethan admitted to using Viviana's BMW to the store and moved drugs without her knowing the full details. He claimed Viviana knew he was dealing, but didn't know about the hidden compartment he'd installed in her door panel. This meant Viviana might face charges for letting her car get used, but they were lesser charges than actual dealing. Bowden said this was good for my case because it proved someone else had access to the BMW and was actively using it for drug storage. I felt relief wash through me, but tried not to show it too much because Viviana was still in trouble. Mom squeezed my hand under the table. The next morning, Bowden called again, and this time her voice sounded different, lighter. She said the DA's office had reviewed all the evidence and decided not to file charges against me. They didn't have enough proof connecting me to Ethan or the drug operation, and the parking lot footage plus Ethan's confession made it clear I wasn't involved. I could breathe for the first time in 3 weeks. Actually breathe without feeling like my chest was crushed. Mom started crying happy tears and hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. Bowden warned us that this didn't mean everything was perfect, but the immediate threat of criminal charges was gone. I thanked her about 10 times before hanging up. Mom made my favorite dinner that night even though we couldn't really afford the ingredients, and for a few hours everything felt almost normal again. But the next day, Malone called me directly and his tone was all business. He said I needed to understand that not being charged didn't mean they thought I was completely innocent. It just meant they didn't have enough evidence to take me to court and win. If any new proof came up connecting me to Ethan or showing I knew about the drugs, they could revisit the whole thing and file charges later. He told me to stay out of trouble and keep my distance from Viviana and anyone connected to the case. I said I understood and hung up, feeling like the relief from yesterday had a crack running through it. Mom asked what he said and I told her, watching her face get worried again. She said we'd deal with whatever came next, but for now I should focus on getting back to normal life. Except normal life was gone, and I wasn't sure how to get it back. Principal Butler called me into her office 2 days after the DA's decision. She had papers spread on her desk, and her expression was serious but not angry like before. She said my suspension was lifted based on the DA's review, but there were conditions. I had to sign a behavior contract promising to follow all school rules, report any contact with law enforcement, and maintain good grades. She also said the incident would stay in my school record permanently, which meant colleges might see it when I applied. I'd be allowed back to class starting Monday, but I had to meet with the school counselor every week for the rest of the semester. I signed the contract without arguing, because getting back to the school was better than sitting at home watching my future disappear. Butler handed me a schedule for counseling appointments and told me she hoped I'd use this as a learning experience. I nodded and left her office feeling like I'd been given my life back, but with strings attached that would never fully go away. Coach Beck texted me that afternoon asking me to come by the gym. When I got there, she was in her office with practice schedules pinned to the wall behind her. She told me I was back on the team effective immediately, which made my heart jump. But then she said I'd lost my position as captain because of the disruption and the attention the whole situation had brought to the program. One of the other seniors would be captain for the rest of the season. I accepted it without arguing because honestly I was just grateful to play again. Being on the court was the only place where my brain stopped spinning with everything that had happened. She asked if I understood and I said yes. Then she told me practice was tomorrow at 3:30 and I better be ready to work. Walking out of her office, I passed some of my teammates in the hallway and saw disappointment in their eyes. They didn't say anything mean, but they didn't say anything at all, and somehow that felt worse. The following week, I heard through people at the school that Viviana had been charged with letting her car get used for drug dealing. It was a lesser charge than what Ethan got, not actual distribution, but it was still serious. Her lawyer got her into some kind of program where she'd do drug education classes, community service, and meet with a counselor who worked with people connected to drug cases. If she finished everything successfully, the charges might get reduced or even dropped completely. Part of me felt bad for her because she probably really didn't know about the hidden compartment. But another part of me was still angry that she'd asked me to stay quiet and protect her when I was facing way worse charges. I heard she'd dropped out of our school and was finishing senior year online to avoid all the attention and gossip. She texted me 3 days later asking if we could talk. The message sat on my phone for hours while I stared at it. She said she was sorry for everything and wanted to explain what really happened with Ethan and the BMW. She said she never meant for me to get hurt, and she understood if I hated her, but she just wanted a chance to tell her side. I typed out responses a dozen times and deleted them all. Finally, I just closed the messages app and didn't reply. I thought about everything that happened and realized that even if she didn't know about the hidden compartment, she knew enough to be worried when the cops showed up. She knew Ethan was dealing, she knew her car was involved somehow. And when things got bad, she chose to protect herself by asking me to stay quiet, instead of just telling the truth from the start. Maybe that made sense from her perspective, but it also meant she was willing to let me take the fall to save herself. I couldn't get past that. Mom and I met with Bowden one last time at her office to close everything out officially. Bowden had a folder with all the paperwork and copies of the DA's decision. She told us she was filing a formal complaint about how Scrim handled the whole arrest, especially the aggressive way he treated me in the parking lot and at my locker. She was also raising questions about Thor's reliability, since the dog had given such a strong alert on me when I had nothing to do with the drugs. The police department was supposedly reviewing their K-9 procedures because of the complaint, though Bowden said those reviews usually didn't change much. She looked at me across her desk and said I'd handled an impossible situation with real integrity. She said sometimes doing the right thing meant losing people you cared about, and that was hard, but it was also part of growing up and figuring out who you wanted to be. It hurt to hear because it was true. I'd lost Viviana, lost my captain position, lost my clean record, lost the way my teammates looked at me. But I also hadn't lied to protect someone who was willing to let me go down for something I didn't do. Bowden shook both our hands and said if I ever needed anything to call her. Mom thanked her about 50 times. Walking out of that office felt like closing a door on the worst 3 weeks of my life, even though I knew the consequences would follow me for a long time.